Okay, just a couple more things I want to talk about here. Yeah, so like I said, Rumi was a Sufi and is a sort of classic example, whoop, kind of ahead here, of a Sufi poet writing about God as sort of a lover, as the beloved. And he is not afraid to use some unusual imagery. Sometimes, alcohol is not supposed to be, a part of Islam, but he is willing to use alcohol as a metaphor, say that people are drunk on God. And he has some of his poems are very, he's able to, he uses like sexual imagery to talk about God, which is pretty wild. But, he has all these sort of stories. So it seems like he came from more of a folk tradition of being able to tell sort of dirty jokes and things like that. And he managed to sort of use it as a teaching tool to make things all about God. So that shows how Sufis kind of have their own culture going on, even though it's not a super clear-cut boundary. They're an interesting bunch because they kind of are following the individual pursuit of God rather than the whole caliphate or something like that. Okay, so I want to talk about some of the most important places and the sort of nature of the caliphate. So the caliphate was a big part of the Islamic Golden Age. So while the Roman Empire was in decline and pretty much completely gone after a certain point, and while Europe was not doing too much that was too complicated, not really having a whole lot of writing, pardon me, and not having a whole lot of writing, things like that, and not having a lot of science, Europe wasn't doing any of that, but the Islamic world totally was. They were pretty much continuing on right from where Greece and Rome left off. And this is what's known as the Islamic Golden Age. Just basically that the time of the first caliphate was a time of really a lot of science and research and storytelling and scholarship. There was a lot of cool stuff going on. And some of the major cities were Baghdad, which you might know is in Iraq, but was basically on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, so was a part of Mesopotamia. Another big one was Cairo in Egypt. That was kind of a new Muslim city in Egypt, which is old as heck. And in Spain, there was Cordoba. So Spain was another big center. All three were really big cities under the Abbasid Caliphate and really centers of knowledge and education. Baghdad, though, was most of all. Baghdad was basically the capital for the Muslim world under the under the Abbasid Caliphate. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, they basically established in Baghdad something very like their own Library of Alexandria, and it was called the House of Wisdom. And their goal was basically to translate all the world's knowledge into Arabic. So what they did actually is they translated a lot of Greek and Latin texts into Arabic. And a lot of the Greek and Roman stuff that we have today, we would not have if it hadn't been for Muslim scholars who held on to it. Because a lot of that stuff just disappeared or was forgotten about or was buried, buried underground somewhere. But the Muslim world was copying it out. And so when the Western Christian world starts interacting with the Muslim world a lot more, it's going to be a big time of learning for Western Europe, rediscovering all these things through the Muslim world. So this sort of, when the cultural connection happens, that's going to be a pretty big deal. So the Muslim world is responsible for preserving a lot of these old scientific texts and also a lot of new science and a lot of new scholarship. So if you like new discoveries in astronomy or chemistry or medicine or geography or math, the Islamic world's coming up with all of that. We refer to the Arabic numbers. I think technically they're imported from India, but the number system that we use today, instead of using Roman numerals, is in part thanks to these folks. And you also have historians. You have a guy named Ibn Khaldun who studies these different historical empires and tries to come up with a theory of the rise and fall of empires. He says empires fall when they no longer have like everybody having the same idea. So like an idea is what makes an empire work. And then when that falls apart, then the empire falls apart. So he's got a lot going on. So he's able to, put forth his own historical argument. So he's, someone like Herodotus or Thucydides. He's studying these things, but taking it one step further. So there's a lot going on in Baghdad at this time. We also have things like the study of the phases of the moon. They figured out how the mechanics of all that worked. That was happening during the golden age of scientific research as well. I mentioned at Cordoba, they have this really incredibly beautiful mosque with all these rows and rows of columns here and these sort of careful striped patterns along there. So this is a sort of Spanish style of Muslim art. You can see the use of color and pattern to make this gigantic mosque that has so many arches and just goes on forever and ever, it almost seems like. Yeah, big place it is, and that it's been preserved so long. This is, coming across when the Muslims are in Spain, and it was, converted into a church, and now it's a mosque today. So this is a pretty good example of Muslim art. And here it is from the outside. You've got the minaret to call people to prayer. You've got the garden outside, the sort of big garden courtyard. And you've got some upper story buildings. And then all these columns along here, just this huge space. So you can see the use of shape and texture does quite a lot to create the impression of the building. In the future, we'll look at how Muslims recreated the Hagia Sophia Church as a mosque. So that'll be pretty cool. But I think that's all we have time for today. So that's Baghdad and Cordoba. Don't really have anything from Cairo, but Cairo's an important one too. Those would be the three big Muslim cities. So talked about Muslim history and the religion. So hopefully that's helpful. I will see you guys in the comments section. Take care.